welcome. I am delighted to be here to welcome MJ back and to welcome our guest from New Zealand. And as I was studying what they've created, I thought, oh, that collaborative decision making. Maybe we could use that in Congress. So when I go back, I'm going to suggest it to some of my Republican friends, but we'll see. But Providence and Rhode Island, I think, continues to really play a leadership role in the work of social enterprise. And I know Kelly is here, and I want to salute her early work. I want to recognize and salute our Lieutenant Governor, who has been a promoter of both economic development, but also particularly social enterprise. And thank Beta Spring and the Founders League and Alan and Melissa and everyone who is here, because this is a great example of our really intentional efforts to support social enterprise and entrepreneurship and innovation and growing the economy of our state and solving some of the biggest challenges in the world. And I continue to press at the national level with my colleagues the SEED Act, which will get the federal government really behind supporting social enterprise and to start thinking about not only allocation of resources, but how we solve problems, global problems comes in our country by using social enterprise. So Rhode Island continues to be an example of that, and I use it when I'm trying to convince my colleagues on both sides of the aisle about the importance of this work. So welcome, thank you for all that you do, and welcome home.
Thank you, Congressman, and we also are pleased to have Lieutenant Governor Roberts here to also say a few words.
So I almost think this is too cool a room for me, but then I realize I know a lot of you, so it can't be that cool. But it's great to have MJ back, but even more, before she left, one of the things I found most interesting as we talked about what she was going to do in New Zealand was the fact that we just have this wonderful community here, but too often I think we don't look outside our borders for some of the excitement that we can bring back and kind of cross-pollinate. We've got a lot going on here, and it's really exciting, but there's a lot going on elsewhere too. And looking at, as we were just talking about, the enormous challenges of being in government and trying to build relationships and connections and get input effectively from the community, and the distances that can exist there, and how to make that more comfortable so that people really share their perspectives, and what Lumio has to offer and what MJ went to kind of discover is exciting. And I think that that's why I'm here, because we need to keep improving and keep getting better, and sometimes maybe we go 12,000 miles to find the way to do that. So thank you for bringing Lumio here. In my 10 minutes, I'm like ready to go to New Zealand to find out more, but maybe don't get them back here, but I'll definitely be online. But this is exciting to have you back, and bringing this energy and this expertise with you is really a wonderful thing, and I look forward to us getting the chance to work together, and us getting a chance to work together on so much of this work. So thank you. Thanks.
Well, welcome, and thank you so much. Thank you, Alan, and the Founders League, and I know the Congressman is dashing off to his next activity, and Lieutenant Governor, thank you. She was so wonderful about writing a recommendation for me for the Fulbright, which I think was pretty instrumental in helping me to be selected, so I'm just incredibly grateful. So I'm also grateful to Leadership Rhode Island has been a sponsor for tonight, and Social Enterprise Greenhouse. Thank you, Kelly, and Alan's here somewhere, Brown Social Innovation Initiative. So it feels like family supporting me in general, and me to go to New Zealand, and me to come back and try to bring back some of my learnings. My biggest thanks is hiding in the back of the room, which is that my husband and I decided to go off on a couple months sabbatical to get a break, and that was a big plan of ours. We'd fallen in love with New Zealand in 1987, always thought it would be cool to go back and live there, and it took us 25 years to have a big focus on that dream and to realize it. And then I turned around and complete serendipity found out about this Fulbright Fellowship, threw in an application on a lark, And then it was too good to be true to have that offer. And so I ended up staying for 8 months, many months more than he was able to be there. So Scott, thank you very much for, I like to say thank you for agreeing, but I think he says, I don't think no was an option. And my son Cole, and I'll say thanks to Cole, even though I think he had at least as much fun as I did during his months living there and going to school. But we're in the season of thanks, and I can tell you I'm really just brimming full of thanks for this incredible year. So one thing I'll just say by starters is every time I talk to people about the idea of going away and sort of taking a step away, people say, that's so amazing, I would love to do that. And my answer is you can. And almost everybody says that to me. I found it just so rewarding. It was so full of learning, incredible new perspective. I now feel like I have not only a new home, but a whole international community that's just growing in leaps and bounds since my time there. We made lots of friends. Got to get my clicker, I forgot about that. So here's some family pictures. I'm mostly going to talk about work, but this gives you a little sense of some of the activities we did. We were very active. We spent the whole first month of January traveling. As I said, we made lots of friends. This is my older daughter saying hello. As you know, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are all based out of Wellington. And there was lots of adventure involved. You may know that New Zealand is renowned for being the place where bungee jumping was discovered, and my family, actually each one member of the family except me, decided to do bungee jumping and had to go to the original bungee jumping location. I had a whole different idea of thrills. I lived through my first 2 earthquakes. We had 2 6.9 earthquakes in Wellington, and I can tell you it was quite an experience. One of the things about earthquakes is the tremors just keep going on and on and on, and so you really get into this perpetual state of concern and sort of fear. And I gained a lot of empathy for what it means for people who live in that kind of fear of what's next, which many people on our globe do. So I was very humbled by the experience. The first earthquake I was by myself, and actually that went fine. The second one, I was in a meeting with the Ministry of Business. They were feeling pretty hostile to the idea that I was recommending that they take a leadership role in social enterprise. And the next thing I knew, there was a few trembles and then a lot of trembles, and then we were under the table together. And the moral of the story I have for that is that if you're going to be in a major earthquake, be with people that you like. It really wasn't fun, and I kept looking at them under the table and thinking, this is not who I want to go down with. So I want to just give you a little bit of a feel for some of what I learned about social enterprise, and I'm going to try to demystify a little bit. I would say about 8 out of 10 people before I left and while I was there, when I said I was working in social enterprise, they smiled and said, "That's nice. What is that?" And so I'm going to try to shed a little bit of light on what I was able to understand a little bit better, taking the time out to do some reflection and learning. One of the things, just to tell you about the fellowship I did, is I was based in the government. The government's in Wellington, so that's where we lived. And I also had a sponsorship by the largest philanthropic organization in the country. And I can tell you, I figured out very quickly that the government is very disconnected from what's really happening on the ground. I'm glad our government leaders have now gone off to their next appointment. But I found out very quickly that if I wanted to really find out what was happening and what was needed, I needed to take a different posture. So I sort of rolled up my sleeves and did what I know how to do, which was to get more involved. And I still did the reading and the research and the reflection, but I really did it as action learning. And I just love this quote, which is part of the art that is so visible and gorgeous all over Wellington. And I'll let you read it. But Wellington was a place for me. It was a place to dive in and be active. So what is social enterprise? I think the place I always start is that the world is still facing incredibly complex problems. The vernacular more and more is to call these wicked problems, problems that are really too complex for most of us to be able to tease out and understand. Things like poverty, violence, climate change, and all these extreme weather conditions, we're starting to feel that more and more. Preventable diseases like obesity. So the question is, with all the resources that we're putting focused on these wicked problems, all the knowledge that we have, all the technology that we have, we're actually going backwards with most of them. And the question is why? And so social enterprise really comes out of that query of what could we be doing fundamentally differently to make progress on these big wicked problems. Another piece of social enterprise is really the sense that we're in a period of epical transformation. And I think when you're in the middle of it, it's really hard to understand it. And I just think Cole's here, and there's 8 years between him and his older sister, and I just think really the growing up experience he's had just thinking about technology compared to his older sister. So I think we have a hard time appreciating all of the change that's taking place. It's also creating different notions of responsibility and community, different idea of markets, and even capitalism. And one of the areas I found probably the most remarkable in my research was getting exposure to some leading thinking that capitalism is really an evolving system. And the idea, Michael Porter from Harvard Business School wrote a piece about 2 years ago calling it shared value. That capitalism really needs to be about market values, but also community or social values. But the piece of that was so interesting to me was I had no idea that Adam Smith's original writings about markets and capitalism was about shared value. Yeah. And so he writes a lot about going back to some of those original concepts and why they make sense and why they're important. Bill Gates calls this creative capitalism. He's been talking more and more with that language. And Richard Branson, he's formed this group called the B Team. Has anybody here heard of the B Team? So the B Team is these leaders in industry and business around the globe that have come together, and they're looking at how business, how corporations can prioritize people and planet along with profit. There was a group, the Elders, that formed a number of years ago to sort of come together, some of the most notable leaders in the world, and so he's modeling it after that. And I've had some conversations with that group, and they're very seriously passionate about this and sort of rethinking what capitalism is at its heart. I came to understand these changes as a market correction. So in the reading I did, the thought is that social enterprise may be a natural market correction that is in some ways making change more efficiently than government, more creatively and more sustainably than the not-for-profit sector, and more generously than business. So it's a work in process. It's not clear yet, but it's an attempt to draw on each of these sectors and to try to bring together pieces of them to be more effective in terms of making change. It's really confusing. It's hard to understand what social enterprise is. I think many people think it's a different form of a not-for-profit, and there's a lot of bleeding lines because the legal structures haven't adapted to the organic structures of work that's adding value. We don't really have the right policies or lexicon to talk about what it is. Now the fastest growing social enterprises are not structuring as not-for-profits. They're structuring as private companies because they feel that they're more nimble that way, they can use their business models more actively, and they have better access to capital. Most social enterprises I find are using both structures because they're very savvy about wanting to scale growth, and that's the way they get access to the most capital. So it's very confusing because the lines are blurred and because it's something that's evolving every day. I find this helps in terms of thinking of it from a spectrum standpoint. So if you have a traditional not-for-profit, by the way, I just have to say, I think the term not-for-profit, if we're talking about language, just, somebody should make a national proclamation that it's, I mean, think of what that means and infers, not-for-profit. A community benefit organization, or, there's a lot of language that speaks better. But if you think of a traditional for-profit on the right, so it's a product or service that's designed for profit for shareholders and or owners, and then a not-for-profit. Then there's a lot in the middle. And it's getting really fuzzy to sort of try to understand these different structures and how they're different and where the lines are drawn. So I think I like the spectrum. I would take the clear lines away because I think they need to be fuzzy lines that are bleeding all over each other. Where did we go? No, gotta go backwards. There we go. So in terms of what it is, I like to begin with the end, which is what's the intention, what's the purpose. So if you think that the intention of a business is to make profits for shareholders or owners, the intention of a not-for-profit is some sort of social good. The intention of a social profit has multiple goals. Very often they talk about triple bottom line, so economic or profit, social and environmental. And increasingly in my research, I found a talk also about a cultural bottom line. In New Zealand, that's very important, where the indigenous population, the Maori, and also Pacific and many other ethnic populations are very central to the community. So I'm beginning to use these 4 dimensions of bottom line. So it's not always the same in every social enterprise about what the balance is, but you have an intention that the goal of what you're creating is to achieve some measurable impacts under these buckets of these 4 different areas. So there is not a good definition of social enterprise, and it really is a glitch. So I, at least in my time there, tried to come up with what I called core attributes. And it seemed to be very helpful in New Zealand to be able to define that. So I'm going to run through those really quickly. One is social intent. So being really clear, what is the purpose that you intend? So one of the things we know is there might be a not-for-profit that is producing organic drinks. And it sees itself as a social enterprise because it's sourcing that from organic farmers, it's better for health, so there are all sorts of different dimensions of social good. But there could also be a business that's producing organic drinks, and it also has social good in mind, but it's structuring itself as a business. They see it as their livelihood, they're deriving profits, could be for them as an individual small business owner, or it could be for some shareholders. So those are 2 businesses that as a consumer would look the same, but sort of the behind-the-scenes intent may be different. They would structure them differently, and the main difference would be that the person that's doing that for a social business would channel those profits back into that social intent to grow, to try to scale that intent. So that's the social intent. Business models and tools is they're using all sorts of tools that to be successful, to grow and be sustainable. So many people think that social enterprises are simply using markets to trade services or products, but I think they're using sort of the whole spectrum of tools that any other business would do, and therefore they look a lot more like a business, and they run a lot more like a business. Ownership meets the needs of the social purpose. So ownership and control is about the mission. It's not about sheer profitability. They're accountable and transparent, and that gets really important when you talk about sort of these bleeding forms, because the question will be, how do we know something's a social enterprise versus a business? And I put these bottom 2 in a separate color. So one is reinvest the profits to further the mission. So that's very key for a social enterprise. But one of the things that's happening now in other parts of the country, not in the world, not so much here, is that some social enterprises are ready to scale so big that they're getting investors to provide equity to be able to do that scale. And then they do owe that money back to those investors. So the investors aren't doing it because they're looking for big financial return. They're doing it for a different intent. They want to scale a social impact. But they do need to return some of those profits back depending on what that agreement is. So again, it means that social enterprise is getting more and more complex in terms of understanding the guidelines. And the last one is to pursue scale. And many people think that to be a sort of valid social enterprise, you need to be intending to create scale. So if you're a small social business, you're doing a good job, some people in the field sort of diss that and say you don't count. And because you're not going to go out and grow that and change the world. And others say, give me a break. In business, there are all sorts of businesses, right? There's your dry cleaner or your accountant, and we're very comfortable that there's all sorts of small businesses, and then there's large businesses. We understand that those are all different kinds of business, and we should have that space for social enterprises as well. So these two are a little bit more controversial, but I see these as sort of the core attributes of social enterprise. Social enterprise is growing like crazy around the world. Just to give you a quick sense, 68,000 enterprises are in the UK, probably the global leader. Again, very rough estimate because we don't really know, because it's hard to define what's a social enterprise. 24 billion pounds contributing to the UK economy. Australia has approximately 20,000 ventures. I think one of the things that's interesting is they recently invested 40 million Australian dollars into social enterprise, and it was half invested by government and half by social finance. So Canada, Australia, the UK are way far ahead of the US, in particular in terms of government, and somewhat in terms of social finance, although our social finance is growing in terms of investing in the growth of the field. In the US, 3.5% is estimated to be the gross national product in terms of social enterprise, which is a small number. But the interesting thing about it is that 1/3 of the growth is in the last 24 months. So the growth curve of social enterprise right now is like this. And one of the things I'll talk in a few minutes about is how young people are flocking to the field and why that growth seems to be at the very early stage of the curve. I'm not going to talk a lot about legal structures or funding. I feel like those are whole other talks I can give another time, but I will say that JP Morgan estimates that the social impact market will reach $1 trillion by 2020. And I think people are not appreciating that many people and institutions with vast wealth are beginning to shift their investment away from investing in business growth to put some portion of their assets into social impact, and very excited to do so. So that pool of money is growing quite rapidly. So just a couple of examples of social enterprises in New Zealand. Alan, where's Alan? Yeah, Alan gave me this concept, which I hadn't heard of, throwing the sheet over the ghost. What I found when I was in New Zealand, when I first got there, people said there wasn't much social enterprise. And then I started talking to people and hunting, and I found actually, it's my favorite New Zealand word, there was heaps of social enterprise. It was just that people were confused about the terms, it wasn't very well known. And so when I sort of looked under the table, I found more and more, and the more I looked, the more I found. And so Alan talks about this idea of throwing the sheet over the ghost, is that sometimes there's something happening, but it's just not well understood. Throwing the sheet gives form to what's not well understood. I found that to be very much the case in New Zealand, and I have a hunch, actually, it's quite a bit the case in Rhode Island. So I'm just going to show you a couple, just to give you a feel for concrete social enterprises. So this was the social enterprise. I hope the Lumio gang won't be offended when I say this is the one that excited me really the most when I was in New Zealand. It's called, sorry, but now I'm, of course, equally in love with you guys. It's called WikiHouse, and I'll tell you why I fell in love with it. It's, Scott told me I shouldn't use jargon, so this is a jargon word which is being disruptive in a market. So the idea with social enterprise is not that you're just doing a good job with a new thing, but that you're really changing the whole nature of that market or service or social issue. These guys are doing it. They live in Christchurch, where the earthquakes just leveled housing, so it's absolute crisis. And they found an open source design for a new type of housing. It's sort of a piecemeal house. And if you think of like a Lego set, you make it in pieces on a new kinds of fabrication equipment, and you make just the house you want and need when you need it. It's pretty easy to make. It's very, very inexpensive to make. It's inexpensive to maintain. It works very well in floods and earthquakes and all sorts of other situations, including basic maintenance, because when something happens, you're just replacing the pieces, not a huge amount of structure. So some people had created an original design, and it was open source. And after the earthquakes, there was such a crisis around housing, these two guys started playing with it. And they were working on the product. They were getting all sorts of people involved, and they were beginning to develop it. Interestingly, the MIT fabrication lab was a huge player. They have these fab labs that they're supporting all over the globe. There's one in Wellington. They played a huge role, and they actually fabricated the prototype at the fab lab. And now, the people who created the original design view that the house, as it's developing the prototype in New Zealand, is the most sophisticated design in the world. And so they're on the verge of having this incredibly disruptive kind of housing. And what's so cool about it is you can design it yourself. You can change the design. You can build it in, a week. And it takes developers out of the process, so you could change the whole way communities are building. You can build a 2 or 3 room house when you're just starting out. When you add a person to your household, you can add a room. When you send your kid off to college, you can send them with their room. And their dirty laundry. So doesn't that sound amazing? But they were sort of stuck in product development hell because they just didn't know the right people. They weren't connected with business developers. And in fact, when I met them at one of the kinds of events that these guys would host, which was appropriately at a bar, an all-call, MJ Kaplan's in town, she's working in social enterprise, anybody come. Now they had set up appointments for me for 3 days with social entrepreneurs, and they did not have these guys on their list. But they came to the bar, and I met them. Long story short, I connected them with a lot of other people. I helped them to think about what they were doing in a different way, and all of a sudden, they were having this breakthrough of people really getting what they were doing. The mayor of Wellington just became totally jazzed and realized what an incredible powerhouse this would be for urban planning and for their issues. Interestingly, Wellington, that doesn't need the housing nearly as much as Christchurch, but now Christchurch is moving ahead. So this is an example to me of just 2 people that took something open source online and went running and could change everything about how we think about housing. But just helping them think about who they were and what they were doing and how they were doing it made a difference of them moving sort of slowly and getting a bit stuck versus really accelerating the process. So I wanted to share this slide just to say there's very deliberative steps in terms of what it takes to do a startup, and I was focusing on startups. And it's quite the same in social enterprise as it is in commercial enterprise. So one of the things that happened in my time in New Zealand was I helped to bring together the social enterprise community and the startup community with the commercial startup community. And they did all sorts of sharing. And one of the things that the research shows is that the biggest gap is once you've sort of gotten started and you're developing, is when you're really ready to sort of do your proof of concept and to demonstrate that whatever your idea is going to work. And that seed capital is the biggest risk spot. Once you can show that it's going to work, it's actually much easier to get capital to begin to grow and scale. So that's a real deficit area, and that's where the Wiki guys were stuck. I wanted to talk about this as a completely different kind that's probably more of what you think of when you think of social enterprise. This is a place-based, a community-based enterprise called Te Hana. It was a neighborhood that was in such distress that the town said they would no longer provide any services. Huge crime, all the jobs had gone away, the kids were dropping out of school. It was just a terrible environmental problems. It was a mess. So the local community, mostly indigenous, got together and they just said, they're just leveling where we live in our whole community. They're taking it off the map. We've got to do something. They did a community process, and they had a vision to create a community and cultural arts center. And long story short, they built it. They did huge reclamation of the natural environment in the property. They took just abandoned property. And they were able to build several structures where they have a cafeteria, they do performances, education, school children come, tourists come. They've built sort of a mock-up of a historic tribal village. And they literally took a community that was about to be decimated and have resurrected. Crime dropped enormously. Kids are back in school. One of the pieces that I cherish the most is when they built their religious building called a marae, they had lost track of the designs that were appropriate for their tribe. And they had to go back and research those. And so now they're teaching their youth those designs so they can appropriately decorate the marae that they've built. So it's incredible. Now, they've been around for 10 years. They got a fair amount of philanthropic funding, a little bit of government funding, but really it's been sort of sweat equity. And they're not breaking even yet. And when I was there, the foundation said, what do you think, MJ? Can you go visit? Tell us what you think. Should we continue to fund them? And they were very skeptical. They felt like this was one of those cases that, oh my God, it's going on forever. When are they ever going to get their act together? And what I found was they were doing fabulous work, but they were not ready. They were not at the place that they were going to be making a profit for a couple more years. But they understood that. They knew what their deficits were, and they had a plan to get there. So I brought the parties together, and they did a new investment plan to help them get over that hump. And I would predict in 2 years that they'll be making a profit. So they literally saved a community, they saved the people in the community, and there are all these other benefits. And you know, this is something that's not going to necessarily go to scale, but I think is an incredible example of a social enterprise. So this is Inspiral. It's a hub similar to this kind of a hub. It was started as a tech hub. So it was started by people that were programmers that were interested in moving into the social space. I don't want to say a lot about this except to say in a couple of years, I think Inspiral has completely changed the whole landscape of social entrepreneurship and startup innovation in Wellington and in fact in all of New Zealand. So the Lumio team that's here and 15 other enterprises were incubated in just the last 2 years. They're doing social enterprise training. They did a social enterprise startup weekend, which I thought, for those of you who know about Startup Weekend, when people come together for a weekend to invent new products and services, I had no idea that in the whole world there had only once been a startup weekend focused on social enterprise. And Wellington, with Inspiral actively involved, did the second one, and it was just extremely successful. So one of the things I spent some time doing was looking at the role of hubs in communities in terms of economic development and social impact. And I've just come to believe that they're absolutely essential. I whispered in Congressman's ear that I think we're on the 3rd floor, and then, am I right, Founders League is on the 5th floor?
4th and 5th floor.
4th and 5th? Well, I just was suggesting that we need one more floor here, and that should be the social innovation floor, that we just have a hub that is relating with these guys here and the guys upstairs, but wholly focused on social innovation. One or two quick other examples. I worked quite a bit with a mental health social enterprise that's been around for over 30 years. So they both place people with mental health issues in jobs, but they also have an enterprise where people work and they get contracts for that work. For instance, they make the headsets or turn around the headsets from Air New Zealand, you know, that need to be cleaned up and repurposed. It's very controversial in the mental health community because they're subsidized by the government, so they're paid below living wage and then subsidized by the government. And so there's the argument, well, that's not a real social enterprise because the government's contributing. And I became very clear that that's just ridiculous, that all of the research shows how incredibly important it is for people with mental health issues to be working. Spent a lot of time there talking with people and looking at the research. So the fact that the government is contributing to the ability of that social enterprise to be successful, they get real contracts on the marketplace. You know, I met with a number of the businesses that use them. To me, it's a brilliant social enterprise, and then they have the companion component where they're placing people in other workplaces, mainstreamed workplaces. And one last example I'll give is called LifeHack. It was one of the few cases of innovation in government that I saw, I'm sorry to say. And it was a case where youth mental health is a huge, I would venture to say, crisis in New Zealand. And the government partnered with the startup community and also with industry to do something like a startup weekend, bringing youth in to come up with products, social media products for youth with mental health issues like stress and depression and whatnot, to try to address those issues. Their goal was perhaps to be able to roll out 2 products out of that national process. They did 4 startup weekends, and they were so jazzed by the potential of the ideas and the product proposals that they're rolling out 10 of them with industry support to roll them out. And Inspiral is playing a key role to do the business development process. So that's a case where you have truly a partnership between government, the business community, and the social enterprise, and the not-for-profit community, because the mental health community is deeply involved. So I wanted to give a couple of examples to try to demystify what is social enterprise and to understand it takes these many different forms. It's not a panacea, but it is just a different way to try to create structures, businesses that are creating social impact. So I'd just like to say a couple of words about why I focused on youth. I'm not going to talk a lot about my research, but I looked quite deeply actually in terms of the system for supporting youth to be social entrepreneurs and social innovators. And so I don't know how many here saw that there was a cover story on the weekend in the New York Times. I think it was a weekend review about millennials. Did anybody catch that? That was an awesome article. And what it shows really corroborated, I did quite a bit of research on millennials. So millennials being young people from sort of late teens and into the 20s who are now entering the workplace. And the research is quite compelling to show that they really are a generational cohort with a number of differences from those of us who are older. This article talked about that their driver in life right now is meaning. That there's a real misunderstanding about them, and when you peel away some of the crisis that they're facing in a bad economy, that the essence of the millennial generation is a cry for meaning. Some of the other research shows that their highest value is freedom, and that in work they want freedom, that they're going to skirt in and out of commercial and social work throughout their career. They just don't see themselves on one trajectory. We know that they're going to be in lots of different jobs, but we didn't always appreciate that they're going to be working in both of those different spaces. And many times, and I met many people in Wellington, both at the same time. They don't see a disconnect there. There's a lot of data now that shows that millennials have a strong entrepreneurial mindset. They just view, many of them, that they are entrepreneurs. So they're doing their life as an entrepreneur, and they see entrepreneurship as a verb, not as a structure. And the last thing I'll say is they don't do boundaries, as you know from growing up with Facebook and all these different tech tools. They just don't hesitate. If there's somebody that knows something in Taiwan to help them out, they'll just send off query, and they're collaborating all over the place. So all sorts of boundaries, age boundaries, geographic boundaries. So they're really into collaborating, and they're pretty good at collaborating. It's sort of how they've come of age. I wanted to just point out this fellow up in the corner, Jack and Draka. Has anybody ever heard of him? Yeah, so I found him in a TED Talk. He was 13 when a family member, someone close to his family, died of pancreatic cancer. He was overwhelmed, and he just couldn't believe the statistics that showed that most people, when pancreatic cancer is diagnosed late, have a 2% chance of survival, and most people are diagnosed late. So this just didn't make sense to him. So he started working on this. Now granted, I'm not sharing this because I think all of our kids are Jack. But because, he's precocious, so I give you that. But I'm just trying to sort of make a point, and hopefully you'll take it for that. So he went to work on this and started researching. If you see his TED Talk, he's adorable. He said he went to where teenagers, their best friend, Wikipedia and Google. And so he started working on it in his kitchen. Eventually his mom said, you got to get these test tubes out of the kitchen. So he wrote to, I don't know if it's 100, because I've heard 100 and 200 labs. All but one said, thanks, kid, but no thanks. and the one said, come talk to us and we'll see. And long story short, he invented a diagnostic screen for pancreatic cancer that flip-flopped the results. So it's like 90% effective in early stage detection. It's low cost, very easy to do. I think he's 16 now, off on his next venture. So Jack is unusual, but I think we're missing the boat if we don't expect that our young people are home when they think they're doing their homework, and many of them are doing inventions all the time. This is a maker community over here in Christchurch, and what I loved about it was in a container space, because of course they don't have any buildings or housing. And this woman was working with young kids doing 3D printing. I don't know if any of you have seen 3D printing, but it's really cool. And what really struck me meeting this group was that she was working with 10-year-olds. So the first thing one of her classes did is they all made things, and then they went to school and started selling them. Now, some of them were just cool, robots, and others were things that were more useful. But what really struck me was, who here knew that you could make your own 3D printer with open source information on the internet? I didn't. And it's not that hard, and it's not that expensive. So you know what the kids did? They did it. They did that. They said, this is cool, but we want a 3D printer in our school. So they started making the printers and selling them to their schools so they could have them in their classrooms. And so they're now a profitable social enterprise. So that's what really struck me. And Flair It, it's a school sort of like the Met that's also has a tech group that's their high school, and they're growing social businesses every day. And they partnered with the mapping organization that does the GIS mapping, which is out of the U.S. And now they're doing mapping programs all over the world, making money. In this case, it's a public school, and the kids keep the money, and they're organizing this as their own commercial businesses. So I'm just going to close with a couple of words about what it is that I learned from all of this experience, and what are some of my takeaways from Rhode Island. It is really far away, and I think you really do come to believe that making change is place-based, and yet it was remarkable to me to figure out how many things are transferable as well. So the first thing I guess I would say is that I really think we have to think about how we're understanding social enterprise. I mean, even backing up, I guess the question is social entrepreneurship and social innovation, making positive social change. The question is, does it matter in Rhode Island? And needless to say, I feel it's a rhetorical question, but we're not behaving as a community as if it really matters. Because if it really matters, we would be sort of proactively trying to organize around that concept, and we're really not doing that. So that's the first thing that I noticed. When we've been traveling around, and since I came back, I've met with a number of people, and a lot of the people that know the social enterprise community here, they've talked about it in fairly negative terms, I found, and said, well, it's not really doing much, and we don't really have many enterprises, and I think it's sort of jargony. And I guess I would throw out, I wonder if we need to throw the sheet over the ghost in Rhode Island. I think we just don't even have a clue about how much is going on that we could categorize. And of course, do we care if we categorize it? Well, I think it matters. I think it matters for policy and funding and research and many other ways. I think that when you start talking about it differently and thinking about it differently, you really start meeting different people and learning different things, and all sorts of positive change comes from that. So I actually do think that really matters. I went to an event, I think co-hosted by these guys at the Garage recently, and I would say at least 3 or 4 of the examples of what they were presenting as commercial enterprises in my mind were totally social enterprises, but they didn't pitch them that way. Now I need to go back and find out really what they're doing with the profits to understand that. But what was interesting is, and this isn't to make a diss, but I think they really meant well. They included a social enterprise or two, and they had them at the end, and they had them present like an hour after the program was already supposed to have ended. So, I think it is a sort of and by the way kind of a thing, where I think it's warranted to, be thinking about it along with other kinds of social impact work. What is it that's needed and what can we do? And I would say, the last two things that I think I learned, one is I really think these hubs really, really, really make a difference. I mean, look at here, how much is going on, and this has been a huge growth curve and is making a big difference in terms of jobs in the economy and networks. Recently, someone told me that they had the idea of having someone join them in a social enterprise, and their parents talked them out of it. And I have a lot of conversations with young people and also with their parents, and it's because they worry that it's not a legitimate field. And so I think, being connected to hubs like this and having a hub helps to legitimize it as a true field. And I guess the last thing I'll just say is, I think that we all need to put on rollerblades, because these young people are, they're crazy. They're smart and they're capable. And I met young people working in little tech studios in the lowest of the lowest income communities in New Zealand. And they were making movies and they were making games and they were making products and they were making social change, and they were going crazy. And they had a real vision for their future. Now, many young people don't, but I think one of the things that I learned is I think we really need to bring our young people right to the table with us. I think there's a tendency, we like to mentor them and we like to pat them on the back and feel that we're their teachers. And I can honestly say, working more and more with young people, as young as my dear son back here, I'm learning as much from them as I hope I'm giving back to them. So I guess that would be my close in terms of some of my lessons learned from New Zealand. So in closing, I would say when I had to do sort of a formal paper, and they made me have editors that was supposed to sort of meet certain academic standards. And the editors said one thing to me, which when they read my papers, they said, this is pretty good, but we think you're too passionate about your subject matter. So I could go on for hours. I'm not going to do that because I want us to have a chance to mingle. I'm going to introduce my dear friends and colleagues from Lumio to just for a moment or two share a bit of what they're up to. And I'll just say, part of why I did this this way, I know most of you, not all of you, but I hope you will stay and have a drink, and I hope you'll find the people that you don't know here, and I hope that we can see this as the beginning of doing some crazy stuff together here in Providence and statewide, because we need it, and I think it's possible. So from there, I'd just like to introduce John Lemon and Vivian Maidaborn. They are doing awesome work to create a collaborative workspace online that I think is changing decision-making, for the whole world. And I'll let them say a little bit more about it, but I'm just delighted that they've found their way to Providence.
Well, kia ora tātou. Is that on? Can you hear me?
Yes, it is.
Yes, I'm Vivian Maidaborn. In New Zealand we have a tradition where when we introduce ourselves we kind of say where our river and our mountain is. So just to let you know, I live on the Cook Strait in Wellington and watch the wind blow in, the southerlies and the northerlies. And my mountain is the Orongorongos, which is backs the Wellington Basin where lots of us go tramping a lot. So yeah, and this is John Lemon.
Yeah, hello. I pretty much live the same place as Vivian, so I've got the same mountains and rivers. Yeah, I just want to first say thank you to MJ so much for bringing us here, and thank you to everyone else who's came and supported us and has been talking to us. I feel like I'm at home here in Hub because, like MJ was saying, they're just so important. Like Lumio, which is what we've been working on for the past 2 years, it really wouldn't have happened if the Inspiral Hub in Wellington didn't exist. So I just wanted to echo MJ's sentiments about how important they are and how I just feel really at home right now.
So just a little bit about Lumio. We're a social enterprise that's been going about 18 months. We seem determined to do everything new, which is kind of challenging. So we have an organisational structure that is currently a workers' cooperative, but by another year or so will involve our users as well as channel partners as owners of the business. And it's horizontal, there are no bosses, so we're all learning how to distribute management, which is an incredible journey. And finally, what we are really doing is changing the way the world makes decisions. So that's a big vision, but we feel very passionately that unless we're all involved in the decisions that affect us, we won't make better decisions. I want to just finish really by acknowledging the role of catalysts in social and political and economic change, and name MJ as a catalyst for positive change in the New Zealand context. And I think it really goes to the gift of having a person who's kind of seeing something fresh and new and independently reflect and mirror it back to us. So what MJ did in throwing the sheet on the ghost in New Zealand was help us to see what the informal systems were that we could kind of feed and strengthen and firm up a bit in order that we could have a more coherent plan going forward as a sector. So really want to acknowledge you, MJ. It was just such fun, and now we feel very privileged to have you as part of the Lumio team here in Rhode Island. Thank you. Very happy to answer questions.
So they're here. We can have more time to learn about Lumio. I'm not going anywhere for quite a while. And eat, drink, and be merry, visit, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, that's wonderful.